If you're asking who the biggest, thickest, juiciest athletes on the planet are, it's really hard to have the conversation without mentioning the absolute behemoths that populate the sport of strongman. Since 1977, the sport has gathered the beefiest human beings on the planet, wrestlers, football players, bodybuilders, and pit them against each other like a steroid-infused Hunger Games to figure out who is the strongest man on planet Earth. Although being uber jacked is not specifically a requirement for being a high-level strongman, it should come as no surprise that a sport that generally favors bigness would turn out some of the most ridiculous physiques of lifting culture. So I wanted to talk about why strongmen are so effing jacked. Is it luck? Coincidence? Genetics? Is it their horrendous eating habits? I'm going to get to the bottom of their secrets and figure out what we can learn so that we might infuse some good old-fashioned strongman hugeness into our own lives. So let's get started by taking a look at the prototypical strongman. Throughout the entire history of the sport, the average height of the world's strongest man winners has been somewhere around 6'3". You have Mariusz Pudzianowski, who's credited as being right around 6'1", Eddie Hall, Zydrunas Savickas, Bill Kazmaier, who are right around 6'3", and then you have the monsters, Hafthor Bjornsson and Brian Shaw, who are 6'8" and 6'9". Height is a common feature of the sport for two reasons. The first one is that strength alone is not enough to win the contest. It's essentially a decathlon of strength, and you have to be well-rounded in all of the events, not just really good at a few. Virtually all of the events directly reward height. If you're in a carry race, then being taller means clearing the same course in fewer steps. Taller people tend to have longer arms, which makes wrapping around the same awkward implement much easier compared to your opponent. And Atlas stones are very often loaded to platforms that exceed 72 inches in height. That alone seems like a direct slight against the vertically challenged strongman community. So it's no surprise that the sport selects for athletes who are more kaiju than men. The second reason height is the main feature of the sport is that bigger frames can simply just hold more mass. The fact that World's Strongest Man is an open contest that gives no body weight coefficient or consolation prize for guys that didn't finish their dessert means that the best performances tend to come from those who take full advantage. So the sport attracts those who are built like giraffes and incentivizes them to bulk like rhinos. So for the sake of simplicity, let's objectify these athletes by stereotyping them into body type categories. First up are the mass monsters. These are the freaks who embrace their role as the biggest men on the planet and who are not shy about choking down excess calories in order to slap as much extra tissue on their body as possible. Eddie Hall, Glenn Ross, Zydrunas Savickas, Brian Shaw, Iron Bibi, Tom Stoltman, and many more. These are probably the types of bodies that most people think about when they think of the sport. So for every shirtless pic of Mariusz Pudzianowski doing a squat with a steel beam across his shoulders, there are countless videos of heavily marbled strongmen sporting 30% plus body fat doing a YouTube challenge in a pair of Speedos. After that, we have the muscle hamsters. These guys are able to come into the contest with just as much muscle as their bloat lord counterparts, but they manage to do it without the extra body fat. These are your Derek Poundstones, your Alexei Novikovs, Yoko Aholas, Kazmaiers, and just about everyone from Poland, including Jarek Dymek and Mariusz Pudzianowski. Less body fat is certainly an advantage if it doesn't interfere with your ability to maximize muscle growth, and these athletes are generally regarded as faster and better conditioned. Generally. Then you have the typical strongman athletes, tall and fast, but generally lacking in excess mass and strength. These guys make up for their deficits in pressing and pulling power by being adaptable and conditioned. Jesse Morunde, Dave Oslin, Josh Thigpen were all part of the American strongman resurgence that took talent well suited for the NFL and just focused it towards the weighted foot races that made up 2000s era World's Strongest Man. This type of character build is just as useful today, but it has to be evolved further to handle the insane weights of the modern strongman era. So you have guys like Kiel Schkowski who come to mind as the modern examples, who are very tall and narrow. They're built like the elite from Halo, but they're much bigger and much stronger than previous generations. So that mix of abilities allows someone like Kiel Schkowski to crush most of the classic events, but he is still hamstrung by a sub 900 pound deadlift that doesn't cut it in today's field. And then lastly, you have the fat leads. These are guys who don't have quite as much body fat as the mass monsters and who don't typically have the bulging muscularity of the hamsters. They're usually counted out as underdogs because they don't look as physically impressive, but are able to move and lift in ways that are usually surprising to spectators. Martins Licis is a good example of this. I was present at the LA Fit Expo when Martins got his pro card, and the consensus among many veterans in the room was that it was a fluke and he wasn't going to go very far in the sport. Then he won World's Strongest Man. The same goes for Rob Kearney when he transitioned from a great middleweight competitor straight up to the heavyweights. He's one of the lighter athletes, usually under 300 pounds, but he also has quite a bit of body fat. That means he gets a lot out of a relatively small amount of lean tissue. Rob is my Teletubby spirit animal. When I'm feeling sorry for myself because my T-Rex arms aren't optimized for picking up odd objects, I just watch Rob deadlift or do anything with stones. On the topic of body fat, let's start with how diet contributes to strongman jackness. What 400-pound men eat is of infinitely more interest to the average viewer on YouTube than anything else, including their training or their performances. Eddie Hall, Brian Shaw, Martins Lisis, Hafthor Bjornsson, they've all done mukbang challenges, diet swaps, and they've talked at length about what they eat. I'm going to predict now that Mitch Hooper breaks 100,000 subs on YouTube the second he posts a thumbnail of himself eating Taco Bell on the shitter. But on the topic of what these guys eat to maintain their size, spoiler alert, they eat just about everything they fucking can.
To build body weight, you need to eat as much as you can.
Around about 12,500 calories a day.
I never check calories, so I don't know how much eat every day.
Z tego wywodzi się prawdziwa siła, panie, panowie. Definitywnie, gdyby jadł pączki, zrobiłby to lepiej.
Getting strongman big isn't really the challenge. The real hat trick is maintaining anything that looks like a bodybuilder's physique while trying to gain the amount of mass you need to do well in these heavy static events. Many of them have nutritionists to try to solve this problem. Brian Shaw at 6'8" and 440 pounds at his peak reportedly had some trouble working with Stan Efforting because the diet he had him on was too clean. Even though Brian's built like a brontosaurus, he doesn't have the stomach of a brontosaurus, so getting in the necessary calories through lean meat and rice just really wasn't feasible. So it's no surprise that many competitors just don't bother with the aesthetic component. When you're evaluating the really obese strongman with the really lean ones, the role of genetics really can't be discounted. I'm not really aware of any strongmen that live out of Tupperware the way professional bodybuilders do. And it's not that none exist, it's just that it's not the norm. Many are just trying to cram in calories any way they can get them. There's going to be idiosyncrasies like Derek Poundstone using chicken shakes to get in his necessary protein requirement, but most of the lean strongmen that have physiques we would aspire to really couldn't add body fat if they tried. Mariusz Pudzianowski is the best example of this, as he arguably has the most famous physique in the sport. Mariusz has gone on record multiple times as saying he eats whatever the fuck he wants, and he still maintains, and I quote, these beautiful muscles.
I eat everything. I can eat 30 bars of chocolate and drink 2 cartons of milk. Then I can eat like 5 pounds of ice creams in bed, whatever I want, whenever I want, and I always have this like beautiful muscles on my body.
If you imagine a reality where Pudzianowski couldn't eat whatever he wanted and he had to restrict his calories to keep his body fat down, you have to wonder if he would still have the edge that allowed him to become the 5-time champion. Next up, we have PEDs. The topic of steroids absolutely has to be discussed here because it is a main feature of the sport. In a world where steroids doesn't exist, I'm confident that most of the champions would still be at the top. The drugs didn't make you 6'7" and give you wrists the size of soup cans. Your cheater genetics did. But there's just so many fat strongmen that you can't look at steroid use alone as the obvious shortcut to getting lean. It just doesn't work that way. Like, I remember when Travis Ortmeyer got shredded after competing in a really fat state for so many years, and everybody on the forum was screaming, of course he got shredded, look at the amount of gear he's on. Except he was competing at a world level for years, extremely overweight before that. The drugs didn't seem to have any magic effect on keeping his body fat under 35% then. Drugs didn't dice him up, working with his nutritionist did. Now, for the bulging, blocky muscularity of many strongmen, drugs do have a very pronounced impact. I want to point to a few types of performance enhancers that are some of the most commonly used in the sport: Tren, Deca, and oral steroids like Anadrol and D-bol. Trenbolone is so commonly used because of the rapid strength gains. It puts your nervous system on supercharge almost immediately. It's also credited with leaning athletes out, though there are a ton of fat strongmen on Tren, so take that with a grain of salt. It is also highly toxic, so many people feel like absolute shit on it, and the drug gets credited with a ton of injuries. Popping your biceps is a rite of passage in this sport, so if you want a long career as a strongman, best not go putting your eggs in that basket. Deca and oral steroids can also have an aggressive effect on strength. They're also known for their water retention, which generally helps the joints feel better when going through grueling preps with insane amounts of weekly tonnage. When taking these compounds, you can be sure that you're going to see some rapid gains in the muscles of your hips, shoulders, back, fingers, throat, cheeks. Guys, if I can help fund this channel and help you solve a problem, I call that a win-win. So please allow me one moment to preach the good word of Boost Camp. I tend to get a little complex when I'm writing workout plans. Tracking progress for these programs is hugely important, but options were never great. I would write these long, complex progressions by hand into a notebook, or I would carry a binder filled with spreadsheets I printed off of LiftVault. That's why I'm here to introduce you to Boost Camp. Boost Camp is the easy way to track training progress directly from your phone. Their library of programs features countless dozens of powerlifting and hypertrophy specific programs from your favorite creators, including Jeffrey Verity Schofield, Johnny Candido, Eric Helms, Greg Knuckles, Alberto Nunez, and of course, yours truly. Boost Camp also has exclusive programs that you just won't find anywhere else. Select the one best suited to your needs and watch the sets, reps, weights, and exercises populate automatically. Don't guess at that one weight you lifted that one time for how many reps again? Have your log of training with you at all times for easy reference in the convenience of your phone. Not only does Boost Camp have a stellar product, but their support is the only reason this channel exists. So thank you, the viewer, and thank you to Boost Camp. Check it out today. The link is in the description. So the use of these drugs in conjunction with a high-calorie, unrestricted diet and balls-out strongman training leads to a dense, bloated look in many of the athletes. Some of the best examples are guys like JF Corona and Pavlo. Their delts look like they just ran out of room to grow. It looks like the guy pouring the mortar just never turned the machine off. Obviously, genetics is a factor here as well. Just like not everyone on tren is going to be at 10% body fat, not everybody on drugs is going to grow delts that touch their ears. The drugs are absolutely a factor, but keep in mind, results certainly do vary. And that's evident by the spread of physiques within strongman by competitors who are largely running the same types of things. So you're probably not genetically gifted, probably not on a ton of steroids, and you're probably not eating literally every bit of food that is within arm's reach, but don't worry, there is still something for you. Now we're to the meat of the story, and that's the training of strongmen. If there's a common variable among a group of people who look like yaks that learned how to stand up on their hind legs and do interviews, the training is certainly going to be a part of that. At the very least, it shows that you can get extremely muscular and build an imposing physique without dedicating yourself specifically to bodybuilding style training. But I actually think it goes beyond that and gives reason to think that it might actually be better to implement some of these methods even if size is your primary goal. There are 4 important components to strongman training that you should know about: the exercises, the training variety, the density, and the recovery. So let's start with the exercises. There are a few staple movements that most strongman professionals are doing year-round: clean and presses, deadlifts, and various carry and loading events. All of these movements involve aggressive hip extension, and as a result tend to develop horse hips that would make a furry fall over with excitement. It's one of the reasons that strongmen have a mandatory rule of stripping down to their blue Reband stretchy shorts right before doing the last event of the day. They all like showing off those donk gains. For as much as it's been repeated, the simple compound movements offer a lot of bang for the buck. I think strongman is one of the best examples of that. The fact of having to train all of the events to build skill and maintain necessary conditioning makes it very difficult to implement a high number of exercises into training. It's not impossible, as guys like Kazmaier claim to do 70 working sets in a workout, and Pujanowski claim to train 6+ hours a day. But those are the exceptions that prove the rule. It's certainly not the norm. The carry and loading events get special mention as they have some very unique properties that people that don't do strongman are going to miss out on. For one, getting awkward implements off the floor to do a carry or load, whether you're talking about a sandbag, an Atlas stone, or the fucking ding from World's Strongest Man 2005, is more specifically evil than any other deadlift accessory variation you can think of. You think 3-inch deficit deadlifts are bad? Try doing 90 seconds straight of sandbag to shoulder. The position you have to get in to pick up a sandbag or Atlas stone requires you to bend over deep with your back substantially rounded and the muscles of your posterior chain stretched near their limits. So not only are your leverages more disadvantaged than during just about any normal gym exercise you could do, but the hardest part of the movement is where the muscles are stretched to the absolute limit. There is a ton of growth to be gotten in your posterior chain from getting good in these disadvantaged positions, and it's something that you just can't experience from a generic gym exercise. Now, the actual act of standing up with the weight that you just picked up after corralling it into your lap requires a ton of direct power from the hips, along with the midsection and upper back. You don't know what upper back and glute fatigue is until you fail on the 12th rep of a stone over bar. Now forget about picking things up and just consider the carry component. Events like keg and Husafelt carries take all of the muscles of your upper back, midsection, hips, hamstrings, and keeps them working under a pretty damn heavy load for much longer than they would ever experience otherwise. The year I competed at America's Strongest Man, me and 2 other guys went right around 300 feet with a 300-pound shield carry. It was about a minute 15 straight of carrying for each of us. There is just no other exercise that's going to stress those muscles with that load for that long. I've stubbornly tried to get many of my powerlifting clients to implement carries as GPP or to do it after a heavy deadlift session, and to my chagrin, almost nobody does. It's really just because it's hard and it takes people out of their comfort zone, but it is a fantastic developer. Now on to density. I've talked about this numerous times, and it's one of the secret weapons of strength training. Density is the calculation of how long it takes to rack up all of your reps. So a high density workout allows for more reps to be done with more weight in less time. Typical workouts are done with discrete sets, the ones we all know and use, where repetitions are done together and long rest periods are taken in between each set. In Strongman, however, much of the training is focused on getting as many reps in a set amount of time, usually 60 to 90 seconds. So if you're going to take 85% of your deadlift and perform a traditional set, most are going to hit the wall 4 or 5 reps in. But with a full minute on the clock and a strategy for pacing yourself, a well-conditioned lifter might get into the double-digit rep range. This equates to a training density with a high percentage of your 1 rep max that isn't experienced by any other type of lifter, and growth from this is absolutely insane, both in limit strength but also in muscularity. Next, we have to consider the variety included in Strongman. Strongman training requires practice with a wide variety of thresholds. So static events like squats, presses, and deadlifts can be done for a max effort single, just like in a powerlifting meet, or they can be done for reps, often going well past 20 reps within a 60-second time period. And it's very often the case that the winner of one doesn't win the other. That means that you can't just go in thinking that having the biggest deadlift or press guarantees a win in an endurance-based variation of that event. In fact, the most powerful guys at the meet very often will show the oh fuck face when they get 30 seconds into a deadlift for reps and realize that they really shouldn't have sandbagged their AMRAPs at the end of their training peak. I've certainly seen my share of faked blackouts and hamstring pulls in an effort to save face last minute. There are also countless movement variations of pressing and pulling that need to be trained. You may fancy yourself the best deadlifter on the field until you realize that your pull heavily relies on a lot of leg drive from the start and generous bar whip. So a wagon wheel axle deadlift that starts at that dead spot below the knee is going to be a pretty humbling experience for you. Other lifters might be superhuman with elevated deadlifts, but get absolutely destroyed by awkward implements, such as Ukrainian deadlifts, side handle pulls, or God help you, the 4-inch axle deficit pulls that Strongman Corp likes to throw at you every few years. So this means everybody who actually wants to be good is training all thresholds and all variations. I'm sure there's people that will dispute this, but I believe that variety of reps and movement patterns fundamentally contributes to more muscle growth over time, if for no other reason than it keeps you from stagnation that comes with staying in your comfort zone. And that's always been my love-hate relationship with the sport, because it's very stimulating to have to constantly be getting used to things that you suck at, but it's also entirely frustrating. And if I didn't compete in the sport, I probably wouldn't train that way. And I have to believe that I also probably wouldn't be as good. Now, the last component of training is recovery, both between exercises and between entire workouts. The sport of strongman consists of very short sprints with really maximal effort, but then very long rest periods. So in a contest, you might spend 30 seconds finishing a farmer's walk, then have like an hour and a half until it's time to warm up for the next event. So much of the training that strongmen do is going to mimic that. Now, of course, you can build a base by doing things like sprint intervals and conditioning work, and that's really important. But the thing that actually gets you that last rep before time expires at the meet, or the last 10 feet on a max distance carry, it's going to be the runs that take you into the cave of suffering and puts you face to face with your shitty pain tolerance. So when you incorporate that contest specificity into your training, it becomes pretty low volume by default. When you get to the point where you can't get a full breath in, when your erectors are stretched to the limit, and when your glutes stopped firing with 25 seconds left on the clock, you are not going to be doing much of anything for the rest of the workout. Now, strongman also biases towards less frequency because it's much harder to balance all of these moving pieces if you're having to continuously throttle the effort on all of them to make repeated runs throughout the week viable. You can't deadlift 3 times per week and go to failure 3 times per week, so you have to find exactly how to schedule effort and volume in each workout, especially considering that you're also going to be doing a whole bunch of other shit that hits the same musculature in the form of events. So it's just really tricky to try and balance that in a high frequency approach. Again, not to say that nobody does it, but it doesn't tend to be the norm. It's much easier and a lot more specific to the sport to be able to just go really hard on a particular exercise and let that be the driving force of your growth. Then all you have to do is just make sure that you have enough time to recover before you come in and do it again. So what does that mean for us? We know the sport heavily selects for things that we can't really control for ourselves. If we weren't born 6 foot plus with Shrek bones, and if we don't have the capacity to stay very lean while eating whatever we want,
Yes, of course.
we're probably not going to look like Pooj, Thor, or Poundstone. But there are still some key takeaways that can get us as close as possible. The first point is to eat to grow. If you want to acquire a back, shoulders, and arms that make people turn their heads, that's going to be fueled by calories. And the more you get in, the easier a time you're going to have getting there. If body fat is really a concern for you, then you need to learn how to eat like a bodybuilder. That means a lot of calories from lean meats, rice, and veggies, and absolutely no missed meals. Chances are you're not as big as Brian Shaw, so you don't have to worry about getting 9,000 calories a day from chicken and broccoli. So you shouldn't have as much of a problem with it. The rest is really just logistics. Now, what I struggle with clients the most is the people that are constantly wanting to figure out how to grow muscle and get really big and strong while also wanting to forever cut. And these are usually the people that just don't have a very good handle on their diet in the first place. So for most of you, if you learn to follow a generic bodybuilding diet to get in the minimum amount of protein and calories and not keep yourself perpetually in a deficit, you're going to grow and you're going to stay relatively lean. Caloric surplus or no, most of you will see immediate improvements in your physique just by following one of these generic diets, but making sure that you're just doing it to the absolute T. The second point is to select good exercises. If you're a diehard hypertrophy guy and you love doing every exercise under the sun, more power to you. But if you know for a fact that you're not going to do 10 or 12 exercises in a single workout, then the exercises you do choose to do need to cover more bases. Full body movements that allow you to move a shit ton of weight that can be progressed as you increase skill and pain tolerance are absolutely key. You're going to have a hard time finding anything better than a basic squat, deadlift, press, and row, and of course, fundamental carry and loading type movements that we just covered. Special mention from a strongman perspective, however, goes to things like Zerchers, front squats, trap bar deadlifts, hang cleans, push presses, and croc rows. Those are all some of my favorites. Notice they all have a bit of body English. They allow a ton of weight to be moved over a pretty long range of motion. I've never met somebody who's made substantial improvements in their ability to do these exercises who hasn't also seen noticeable physical gains. Glue yourself to these and get comfortable suffering past the 10 rep mark, and I promise you your body will change. Number 3, don't pigeonhole your training. This is another over-specialization lecture alert. The strongest men in the world do not spend all of their time doing sets of 1, 2, and 3 reps. They do a whole bunch of reps with really uncomfortable movements like deads and squats, and they expect themselves to be conditioned enough to handle it. So be in a basic amount of shape such that cardio and mental weakness aren't the limiting factors on something like a 10 rep set of deadlifts. You'll be absolutely blown away by what higher rep squatting and deadlifting does for your body. And by staying out of that over specialized pocket, you're going to get faster, more universal development than you ever would get otherwise. You're less likely to develop weaknesses. And the best part is you will generally be able to walk around with the confidence knowing that you are somewhat useful as a human being. And the fourth step, make sure that extra effort is met with extra recovery. There is certainly a time and place to jack up the volume and accrue more total work and fatigue. I'm certainly a fan of volume as a primary driver of growth. But if you're doing everything we discussed, using really big movements for a variety of rep ranges, and you're pushing the effort, then you are definitely going to need to be able to recover. Do not bank on getting a balls out deadlift session in on Friday and then going in on Saturday to do 5 hours of event work. Rigorous strongman training leaves you almost punch drunk and generally wipes you out for the rest of the day. And if your training throughout the week leaves you feeling the same way, you need to make sure that you're spacing your efforts out so that you're coming in with a net positive every time instead of digging yourself into a recovery hole. So that is my 2 cents on why strongmen are so jacked. That is my 2 cents on the subject. Let me know what you guys think. Do you have any experience with this style of training? Have any of the movements or strategies I discussed led to changes in your physique? Let me know what you think in the comments. Better yet, take it to Patreon. That's where I cover my training weekly. That's where I take questions. That's where I give life advice. That is the easiest way to contact me. So take all your questions over there as well, and I will be sure to answer them there. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.